I think it's about time that you learn how to make onigiri. Hi, I'm Cassie, and in my kitchen today we're going to make onigiri. So the word onigiri actually comes from the word nigiru, which means to clasp or to hold. So you can say to nigiru someone's hand and it means this kind of action. But in this case it means to form or mold that onigiri. So making this kind of a triangular shape with your hands. And this is such a common snack or lunch food. It's always in convenience stores and there's always like this huge array of different flavors of onigiri in convenience stores. And I have to admit that I'm a little bit boring and I always end up going for the tuna mayo one. It's just a classic, you know? But there are so many others that you can make yourself or even try if you do come to Japan. And I think that the classic way that everyone seems to know is that really sort of iconic triangular onigiri with the little bit of nori here so that it kind of looks like that emoji or like it's out of an anime. So that's the one that we're going to be making today. And arguably the most important part of the onigiri is the rice. So you need to use short grain white rice. Please do not try and use any other kind of rice because it will not stick together. Like if you try and use a basmati rice, you're not gonna get a triangle, you're just gonna get a pile of rice. So short grain white rice. And Japanese rice is best if you can find it. And when I'm making onigiri, then I like to use a little bit more water than usual when cooking the rice. And I'm going to make quite a few today, so I'm going to do 3 cups of white rice and 3 3/4 cups of water. Usually I would do about a 1-to-1 ratio or even a little bit less, but because we're doing onigiri today, then we want it to be nice and fluffy and easy to stick together. So we just need to rinse our rice and then pour the rice and all of the water into the rice cooker. I highly recommend getting a rice cooker if you don't already have one and you're planning to make more Japanese food because it just makes everything so much easier. And now through the magic of editing, my rice is already done, so I'm just going to fluff it up with my rice spatula. This is to make sure that it doesn't get too hard on the underside and it doesn't get stuck together already. Then to keep in the moisture but to let it lose some of its heat, I'm just going to cover it with a clean towel. We just want the rice to cool down enough so that we can actually handle it without hurting ourselves. Because you don't want an onigiri burn because that would just be a really lame story. Then whilst that rice is cooling down to room temperature, we're just going to get our fillings ready. So today we've got these 3 fillings here, and I thought I'd go with these 3 because they are very common fillings for onigiri, but they're also like a good segue into Japanese food if you've been used to Western food so far. None of these are too crazy or too difficult to get a hold of. So for all of these, we're going to season the rice with salt. We're not going to put any sushi vinegar or anything like that in there, it just needs a bit of salt. And then for the first one, we're going to use toasted black sesame seeds. And that's literally it, that's all we need for the first onigiri. Then for the second one, we're going to do tuna and mayo. So we're just going for a little bit of Japanese flavors, so we're going to be using Kewpie mayonnaise and a touch of soy sauce. And all I do to prepare that is to drain the tuna and then mix everything together. And then lastly, we have the salmon. This one takes the most preparation, but it's still not difficult. All we have to do is cover our salmon in salt and then put it into the oven for 10 to 20 minutes. I say 10 to 20 minutes, that sounds like a very big range, but it really does depend on what kind of salmon you have, like how big it is, how thick it is. But we do want it to be quite dry, so you kind of want to do it until the skin is nice and crisp and really it's quite a flaky texture rather than being kind of soft, because that's just how it's usually made for onigiri. And the last bit of prep is just to get our nori sheet and cut it into strips. So it kind of depends on how big or how small you're going to make your onigiri as to how long and wide your nori should be. There's not really a hard and fast rule to how big the piece of nori should be, but there are these lines on the nori sheet, and so I tend to just do like 1.5 of those pieces, like including the line. That just seems to be a good width for me. Once we've prepared everything, then it's time to get on to assembling our onigiri. So one of the things that I always kind of worry about when I'm making onigiri is thinking that they're too small or they're too big, and so I've just decided that the kind of best size for me is to do 3/4 of a cup. But this is a Japanese cup, so 3/4 of a cup is 150 milliliters. So American cups I think are a little bit bigger, So if you want to do it to the exact size that I'm doing it, then you can do it up to the 150 milliliter line. Just for reference, convenience store onigiri tend to be about a cup or a cup and a quarter, and they're just a little bit bigger. But honestly, again, there's really no hard and fast rule for onigiri. Just make it to whatever size that you want to. And as I said, we're just going to season our onigiri with a bit of salt. I'm using this pink rock salt, which is a lot milder than table salt. So I'm just going to do 4 twists of my salt grinder. But if you're using table salt, then you can just wet your hands, because that's what we're going to be doing for preparing the onigiri anyway. And then just put your 2 fingertips into the table salt, and that will season your onigiri nicely. So then I'm going to take my nice warm rice and I'm going to put it into a bowl with my toasted sesame seeds and my 4 twists of salt. Then I'm just going to mix that with my rice paddle. Then I'm going to wet my hands, because if you leave your hands dry, then the rice is just going to stick to you and it's going to be really hard to make the onigiri. Then we're going to take that rice and put it into our hand. And then having one hand flat with the rice on it, you can take your other hand and put it into an upside down V shape like this, and then just press onto the rice. You don't need to press it too hard, but just move it back and forth between each hand until you get it into a nice triangle shape. Then just wrap it in your piece of nori and you've got a nice toasted sesame onigiri. Then the ones with the filling in the middle can be a little bit more tricky the first time around, but don't worry, you'll get the hang of it very quickly. So for this one, I've got my measured and salted rice, and I'm going to just put that into my hand. Then in the rice, I'm going to make a circular indentation. Then I just like to compact the rice a little bit to make sure that it's not going to fall apart. And you want to push this indentation a little bit further than you expect, and really try and get right down to the base of the rice without making a complete hole and getting through to your hand, of course. I just find that this way you can get the filling into the center of the onigiri quite nicely. Then take 1 or 2 teaspoons of your filling and put that into the indent. You really don't want to overstuff this because it won't stay in the onigiri and you're gonna have a bad time. So then using these outer sides of the rice, just gently start pushing them inwards. You don't want to try and smush it all together at once because again, everything's just going to come out. So we just gently fold them in. Then once you think that you've successfully buried your filling with rice, you can start to very gently squish it together to make it into the triangle shape. So you're just doing the same kind of action with the V-shaped hand and one flat hand until you get a nice triangle shape. Then once again, you just lay that piece of nori on it. And you have a nice triangular filled onigiri. And then we can just do the exact same thing with our salted salmon. Because this salted salmon is actually quite nice and dry, you could actually use this in the same way that we did the sesame one. And there you go, there's our 3 cute little onigiri. They look perfect for starting my Cassie's Kitchen anime. These are perfect if you want to eat them straight away. You want to have like a nice fresh soft onigiri, but if you want to keep them for the next day or you want to keep them even longer than that, then my next video is going to be about how to properly store onigiri and how to stop them from drying out. So if you're interested in that, then keep an eye out, or if you're watching this in the future, then the link will be on screen and down in the description below. But honestly, it doesn't matter if you can't make these into those perfect triangles. You can just make it into whatever shape you want. You can make it into a ball. Loads of people do that. And you can put whatever filling you want in there. Put like some other crazy thing that I wouldn't have thought of. Just do whatever, because these are just a really easy snack or a really nice lunch. If you learned anything today or you enjoyed this video, then hit subscribe because I'll bring you more Japanese recipes every Sunday. But that's it for today, so I'll see you next week.